welcome to my channel. Welcome to today's video. Today's video is going to be going over my top 5 favorite neutral palettes. If you know anything about me, I love brown, I love neutral palettes. It's what I wear 90% of the time. I just thought it would be fun to go over some of my favorites here, give you some recommendations. So if you like neutral palettes as much as I do, make sure you give this video a thumbs up. Subscribe if you haven't yet, and let's just get started talking about my favorite neutral palettes. All right, I am trying to decide where to start here. I didn't really rank them. They don't really have like a ranking. They all kind of have different purposes to me. So I think we'll kind of just like go by category and start with the one that's probably the most obvious if you've seen any of my videos, and that is the Natasha Denona Glam palette. I love this palette, even though it is quite a large palette. I don't typically gravitate towards larger palettes, but this has everything that I would want in a palette. It has kind of even some warm tones if you want, but primarily this is a cool tone palette. So you have these really nice like darker gray shades. I think it has a nice balance of mattes versus shimmers. Let's see, there's 5 mattes, and then you have 10 kind of shimmer shades. Some are satins. So I personally like a shimmer heavy palette as long as it has the basic neutrals that you need, which this does. I love this one. I love all these neutrals in here. You're going to hear me say that a lot. Clearly, these are my favorite neutral palettes. But if you're looking for a cool tone, leaning more neutral, it's not too warm tone, this is the best one I can recommend. I think the midi size also, this is her $69 palettes. So I think that's also a great price point for what you get. And I really can't recommend this enough. I did a ranking all of my Natasha Denona palettes. I'll link that video up above. And spoiler alert, this was number 1. That is how much I love this palette out of all my Natasha Denonas. And I have almost 20 of them. So you can't really beat this one. For number 4, I think we're going to talk about my favorite neutral indie palette, and that is the Coffee Talk palette from Sydney Grace. Sydney Grace just has an excellent formula. I've used this quite a bit, and you really can't even tell. You can tell this shade, and this shade is pigmented. If you want a pigmented palette, this for sure is it. I mean, here's that crema shade. It is opaque. It is not for the faint of heart. I dip into this a lot when I want that really just intense neutral look. I'm gonna swatch, let's see, this one too. I also love coffee, so that is just an extra plus for me. I love this shade. That is Risoretto, this one here. I think Sydney Grace just really has nailed her formula as far as any kind of matte or shimmer. You can't go wrong. Even if you don't want a neutral palette, she does sell all of her eyeshadows individually, so you can build your own palette if that's something you like. If you don't like neutrals as much, her colorful shadows are also just as great. This palette is just dependable. It gives you exactly what you need, but it's curated. It's only 9 shades, so it doesn't have too much going on like the Glam palette where it's just a lot larger. And I think this is very versatile. It does have a mirror in here, so you can use that if you want to travel with it. But I use this quite a bit, and I feel like it has a good amount of cool tones like this one here. But you also have this more warm tone leaning brown. It's a little bit neutral warm. I wouldn't say it's fully warm. You do have kind of like that mix of both. It definitely has more warmth than the Glam palette, and I think this one's excellent. I always reach for this one, like I said, when I'm just wanting a more intense brown smoky eye. And I do believe Sydney Grace will be doing a lot of promotions during this holiday season, so keep an eye out for that. And also just a positive thing to say, a lot of her palettes do come in 2 different types. So they come in a light version and a deep version. So depending on your skin tone, you can kind of pick and choose if you want transition shades that have more light leaning, or if you choose the deep palette, the transition shades are a little bit deeper. So she does have a lot of inclusivity when it comes to her palettes, and I do really appreciate that as well. For number 3, let's go over to my favorite travel neutral palette. I don't know if this is a palette, but this is the Petite Neutral Stack from Melt Cosmetics. I use this so much. Every time I travel somewhere, this is the little stack that I take because it has everything you need. So you have just like a crease color here. You have a shimmer right here if you want it. I don't really use the shimmer as much, to be honest. I only use the mattes. Then you have like this medium brown, a slightly deeper brown, more of a mocha, and then a super deep brown that you can use as liner. So this little stack here is just the best companion that you can put with any of your palettes. That's what I love this for. I love this, like I said, for traveling. I take it on every single trip that I go on. And I also reach for this if I have a shimmer heavy palette or a palette doesn't have a neutral crease color that I can put in, or even like my Pat McGrath palettes. I ranked those as well. I'll link that video, but I talked about how a lot of those mattes are just too deep for me. So this is the palette that I'll reach for, where I can just grab like those lighter neutral colors for in the crease if I just want to blend something out. And that's what I love this for. I don't think this is that expensive. I'll put the price on the screen here, but highly worth every single penny. The amount that I use this, honestly, once I finish this, I will absolutely repurchase it because I use it that much. I'm gonna wait until maybe I've used 1 or 2 shades. I definitely see myself needing to repurchase this though, because that's how much I use this. The 4th palette that I wanted to talk about is more of my favorite luxury splurge palette. So that, of course, can go to none other than this Chanel Tweed palette. This is the number 4 Brune et Rose. So let me dump all that out. Here's what it looks like. These 2 shades look very similar in camera, in person, but they are different. Let me just swatch them real quick. This is going to give you a very light wash of color. So whereas the Sydney Grace is very deep, very opaque, pigmented, this is really going to give you more of a wash of color. And then here are those 2 shades swatched side by side. So you have this one right here and then this one right here. But this palette is so beautiful, understated on the eyes. This shimmer also just will blow your socks off. It's so just that effortless, elegant look. It gives like that water effect on the lid in like a gold way because it's more champagne gold. There's just something so special about it. I really had to convince myself not to buy a backup of this because I have like a strict no backups rule, just so I'm not hoarding things before they go bad. And that one was really tough for me because it's a limited edition palette. It has that tweed. I've really almost worn down the tweed. You can even see it's almost, the embossing's almost completely gone. That's how much I use this. I think this is just a special palette. If you can afford to get this, you're not going to regret it at all. I use this all the time. It creates just the most perfect look. There's really only 1 or 2 looks you can do with this palette, but if you're looking to splurge on something, yet you're a neutral lover, this is the palette that I would recommend for that. The last palette that I have, I think is just the one that if someone asked me what neutral palette I would recommend out of everything, this is the number 1 palette that I would recommend. So if I was ranking it, it would come in at number 1, and that is the Persona Identity palette. Now I have the old packaging. I'm not gonna buy a new one just for the newer packaging. This formula still works great. I didn't use it that long ago and it still performed perfectly. But if you could only have 1 palette in your collection and you wanted a neutral palette, this is the one that I would recommend. I think that it's the perfect size. It's not too big, it's not too small. It has 12 shades here. You have the perfect mix of mattes to shimmers. You have the perfect mix of cool tones and warm tones. Overall, this is the perfect neutral palette in my opinion. This Bombshell shade is probably my favorite. Also with Seductive, let's see. And it gives a good amount of payoff, but it's not too opaque. So it's really just in between. This is Bombshell, this is Seductive. It's kind of getting a little muddy because I've swatched on my hand so much, but it really just gives a perfect wash of color, whereas the Sydney Grace is very opaque. The Chanel isn't very opaque at all. This is kind of right in between. They're very buildable shadows, and you can get so many looks out of this. This is not a new palette whatsoever. I want to say this is what, 5 or 6 years old even, and I just can't get enough of this palette. When I want something easy, just know what I want to do, this is the palette that I reach for, and I think it deserves more love than it gets. I do see some people still talking about it, so that is a testament to just how much this palette's withstood the test of time. I don't think I could ever declutter it because it works great still, and I love all the looks that I can get out of it. I think it's a great just all-in-one palette. If you even needed to like do your brows, depending on your brow color, like there's even a just quick have to do brow color in here. You have a liner in here. You have everything you need to do a lot in this palette. So if I lost my collection tomorrow, all my eyeshadow palettes are gone, this would be the first one I would probably go out and buy because that's how much I just love and use this palette. And that is going to complete this video. That is all 5 neutral palettes that I would recommend if you're in the market for any. Some of them newer, some of them a little bit older. Hopefully you found this video helpful. I would love to know down in the comments what your favorite neutral palette is. Not that I need any more, but I'm always just open to suggestions on what your favorite is. So maybe I can take a second look at them. And with that, I will see you all in my next video. Bye everyone.